At first I thought it was fun. We lived in an RV, constantly on the move. It felt like an endless vacation. One week we were in LA, the next in Salt Lake City. The world was our playground, or so it seemed. We didn't remember much about our life before this. Just vague flashes of a house in Portland, our birthplace. But any attempt to recall more always led to a dead end. One thing was clear: we could never stop moving. My parents never told us why. There were no clues, just a firm, unspoken rule. Keep moving, always. We were special, or so they said. My twin sister Amelia and I were their little miracles. They had tried for years to have children, and had almost given up hope before we came along. They never let us forget how precious we were to them, though sometimes it felt suffocating. Amelia and I were close, more out of necessity than anything. We didn't have any friends. Being homeschooled and living in isolation deep in the woods had its way of keeping us apart from the world. Sure, the forests we camped in were vast and beautiful, but there was something unsettling about them. We never stayed at KOA campgrounds with swimming pools or ice cream shops, always hidden away in places far off the beaten path. It was peaceful, but there was a lurking stillness in the woods that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, like the trees were watching, waiting. Looking back, I wonder if they were. The first time I realized something wasn't quite right was right before our 7th birthday. We were staying in a place called Kamloops, deep in the forests of British Columbia. My parents were extra cautious, their eyes darting around every time we stepped outside. We were never supposed to leave their sight, but Amelia and I were 6, mischievous, curious, and the dark, looming forest was an adventure waiting to happen. So, one night while our parents slept, we snuck out of the RV. Slipping out was easy. The window was nothing more than a flimsy plastic sheet held together by a zipper. Armed with only a cheap lantern, we tiptoed into the dense trees. The moment we crossed into the forest, it felt different. The air was colder, heavier, as if we had stepped into another world. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy above, casting long, skeletal shadows on the ground. "I don't like this," Amelia whispered, clutching my arm. But neither of us turned back. The further we ventured, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our breathing and the crackle of leaves beneath our feet. Then, out of nowhere, there was a low whisper. Too faint to make out the words, but it seemed to echo from all around us. "Did you hear that?" I asked, gripping the lantern tighter. Amelia nodded, her face pale in the dim glow. We pressed on, though every instinct screamed at me to turn back. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, though I still couldn't understand it. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches gnarled and twisted like the fingers of a creature lurking just out of sight. And then, we saw it. At first, it looked like an ordinary tree stump, tall and weathered, standing alone in a clearing. But as we approached, I realized it wasn't a stump at all. It was a figure, a man, or something like a man, standing unnaturally still. His face was obscured by a hood, his skin pale as the moonlight. The whispering stopped. The air grew deathly still. I reached out to grab Amelia, but when I looked at her, her eyes were fixed on the figure, wide and terrified. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The figure twitched, just the slightest movement, but it was enough to send a wave of terror crashing over me. "We need to go," I whispered, but Amelia didn't move. Suddenly the figure shifted, and in the flicker of our lantern, I saw its face, or lack of one. A void, blacker than the night itself, where eyes and a mouth should have been. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Without thinking, I yanked Amelia's arm, dragging her back toward the RV as fast as we could run. The whispering returned, louder, urgent, chasing us through the trees. I could feel it behind us, its presence looming closer with every step. We stumbled back into the RV, slamming the flimsy window shut behind us. Our parents never woke up, never knew what we had seen. But from that night on, something changed. Amelia and I never spoke about the figure again, but we felt it. Every time we moved to a new place, every time we set up camp deep in the woods, I could feel its presence, watching, waiting. We never stopped moving after that, and now I understand why. It wasn't long before we saw something strange, a glow, but not from our lantern. It flickered ahead of us, casting an unnatural light. When we got closer, we saw her. A woman, or what was left of one, holding a homemade torch. Her hair was matted, some patches missing entirely. Her skin was a sickly blue, rotted in places, and her teeth were yellow, with a few missing. I swear I could see part of her jawbone. She was dressed in a filthy hospital gown, but the nearest hospital had to be hours away. Amelia and I froze in terror. I instinctively reached for her hand, something I hadn't done in years. The woman, or thing, raised a bony arm toward us and moaned something that sounded like muh boo buh. It was garbled, inhuman. That was enough for me to snap out of it. I grabbed Amelia and ran, dragging her all the way back to the RV. By some miracle, we made it inside without waking our parents. Neither of us slept that night. The fear clung to us like a shadow. The next morning, when we finally stepped outside, the scene that greeted us confirmed our worst fears. The campfire, reduced to ashes, the charcoal-drawn rocks, and the cans of beans on our makeshift table, everything was wrecked. But not by animals. It looked deliberate, as if something, or someone, had been watching us and left a message. What we saw written on the back of the RV confirmed what we feared. In jagged letters scrawled with the charcoal sticks we had used to draw on the rocks was a chilling message. You can't run forever. Mum tried to keep things normal, making us breakfast while Dad silently cleaned up the mess outside. We left in a hurry, driving for hours without stopping, not even for washroom breaks. Mum and Dad spoke in hushed whispers as Dad's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. I wanted to ask what they were talking about, but something told me I didn't want to know. That night, maybe because they saw how rattled we were, they did something rare. They took us to a real restaurant. It was a rundown diner, empty except for the flickering neon sign out front, but to us, it was a luxury. I couldn't wait to dig into a greasy cheeseburger and root beer float. For a moment, it felt like everything was normal again. But as soon as a lone trucker walked through the door, Mum and Dad stiffened. Without a word, they grabbed us and we left before I even had a chance to take a bite. I didn't get it. He was just some old guy. As we drove back in silence, I sulked in my bunk, angry that my perfect meal had been ruined. Amelia broke the silence. "Why did we leave?" she asked, sitting next to Mum. I stayed quiet, arms crossed, but I was just as curious. Mum sighed deeply. "I suppose you're old enough now. You're almost 7. I looked up, my anger fading. "The reason we had to leave is because we're scared of losing you." Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Do you remember what happened when you were 4? I didn't. My memory of those early years was a blur, but Amelia nodded, her face serious. "We were in Beaverton, near Portland," she said. "We were playing in a field when a man came up to us." I shifted in my bunk, trying to recall the memory. It felt distant, fuzzy. Amelia continued. "He was wearing camouflage and big boots. He bent down to our level. He said, 'We're not supposed to talk to strangers.'" I felt a chill crawl up my spine as she spoke. "I remember what I said," Amelia added quietly. "I'm Zach, and that's my sister Amelia. We're 4, and our birthday is July 26th, 2002. She looked at me. "You said that, Zach. You told him our names." I didn't remember, but her words filled me with unease. Mum's voice cracked. "That's when he stopped smiling. He grabbed your hands and started leading you away, saying, 'Let's go somewhere fun.'" I felt my heart pounding, and I could see the fear in Amelia's eyes even after all these years. Mum's eyes welled up. "If your dad and I hadn't found you just in time, we probably never would have seen you again." Dad, who had been silent this whole time, spoke, his voice ice cold. "I shot that son of a bitch in the leg. Hope he had fun crawling back to wherever he came from." Amelia and I exchanged wide-eyed glances. This wasn't the first time something had tried to take us, and it wouldn't be the last. "Okay, Daddy, I'm going to go to sleep now," Amelia said, climbing over me to get to her bunk. That night we stopped somewhere in the interior of British Columbia or maybe Alberta. I looked out of the small plastic window, my breath catching in my throat. She was there again. The woman, that thing standing outside, her eyes locked on us. She stared through the thin walls of the RV, her bony hand stretching toward our bunk beds. Her face was still frozen in that half-decayed expression, as if she had waited for this moment. I rolled over, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to force myself to sleep. But I couldn't. Not with her out there. Life went on like this for years. Every place we went, she followed. Washington? She'd be there. Nevada? Of course. Montana? You better believe it. No matter where we stopped, no matter how remote, I'd see her, just at the edge of the campfire's light or out the window as we sped down the highway. Sometimes I'd spot her in a crowd when we'd go into town for supplies, her decaying face blending into the sea of strangers, and always I heard that horrible sound. Muh-boo-buh, her voice would rasp through the trees, through the air. Over time, the fear dulled, replaced by an odd numbness. Her presence, once terrifying, became something else, an annoyance, a reminder that no matter where we went, she'd always be there, just out of reach, always watching. By the time Amelia and I were approaching 14, we had stopped exploring altogether, not just because we were older and had outgrown the need to sneak out into the woods, but because that night in Kamloops had left a scar, one that never fully healed. The woman didn't scare us as much anymore, but she was always there, lurking. The day before our birthday, things finally made sense. Mum and Dad had left us alone for a few hours while they went to gather things for our birthday. We weren't parked too far from civilization, but it was still a good hour's walk away. Amelia and I didn't feel scared, not anymore. After all, we had lived in the woods for as long as we could remember, and we had learned that as long as you didn't bother the forest, it wouldn't bother you. Besides, the woman in the hospital gown had become more of a nuisance than a threat. Some nights, we even forgot she existed. But that was the last time we'd be able to forget her. I was reading when Amelia, rummaging around the RV for food, interrupted my focus. "Zach, come check this out," she shouted. I rolled my eyes, reluctant to pull myself away from my book. What could possibly be so interesting? We'd lived in this tiny RV for almost 14 years. I knew every inch of it. There was no way there was anything left to discover, or so I thought. Amelia had pulled up the cushion from the driver's seat, revealing a small, battered box hidden underneath. It looked like it had been squished under the weight of years of driving. I felt a strange chill creep up my spine, but I shrugged it off. "It's probably just some boring old papers," I muttered. But when Amelia opened the box, the look on her face stopped me cold. Her initial excitement faded into confusion, and then horror. Inside were papers, birth documents to be exact, for us. But something was terribly wrong. The names on them didn't match what we knew. My name was listed as Zachary Jr., but no one in our family was named Zachary. I quickly scanned the father's name, Zachary. The mother's name, Emily. "What the hell?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "Maybe we were adopted." It was the only explanation I could come up with, but it felt like a weak one. Amelia stared at the papers, her eyes wide. Why would they hide this from us? A creeping unease settled over me, the same feeling I used to get whenever I saw that woman. The woman who had followed us for years, her sickly face just outside the edges of our lives. Suddenly, the idea that something, or someone, had always been chasing us didn't seem like just a coincidence. And now, this box, these names. I looked around the RV that had been our home for as long as I could remember. How much of it was real? How much had been a lie? Amelia spoke, her voice low and trembling. "Zach, do you think that lady has something to do with this?" The air in the RV felt thick and suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. I had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. The life we thought we knew was built on something dark, something dangerous. We were never supposed to find that box. Amelia's face had gone pale as she reached into the box again, shaking as she pulled out another sheet of paper and held it out to me. Her voice broke. I took it and scanned the page. My world tilted. Infants missing from Portland Hospital, July 27th, 2002. Twins, Zachary, Christopher Clark Jeter, and Amelia, Emily Clark. Ongoing search. Anyone with information is to report it to the police immediately. Clark, Christopher. None of those names matched. Our last name was Brown, not Clark. And our parents were Jenny and Kevin, not Zachary and Emily. A cold sensation crept up my spine. I knew it was about to get worse. Amelia pulled out another sheet, her face ashen as she handed it to me. Portland mother of 2 murdered in hospital. Emily Clark, 27, had recently given birth to twins, now missing when she was smothered to death in her own hospital bed. Police drawing of suspects. It wasn't perfect, but the faces looked familiar. Too familiar. The suspects in the drawing were the only other two faces we had seen almost every day of our lives. Mom and Dad. My hands trembled as I looked at Amelia. She was staring at the paper in disbelief. It wasn't over. She shakily pulled out the last piece of paper from the box. This one was dated 2006, the year we were 4. After an Oregon man allegedly spotted the missing kids and was attacked by the perpetrators, a glimpse of hope is seen in this 4-year-long cold case. Father and husband of the victim, Zachary Clark, shares this message. I swallowed hard, dreading what came next. Amelia unfolded the final paper, and we both read the message aloud. To my babies, I have no idea where you two are, but I will never let go of hope that one day I will see your beautiful faces again. You may not even know who I am, but that doesn't change anything. Until we meet again, Daddy loves you. The paper slipped from my fingers. We were never who we thought we were. All those years running, hiding, it wasn't from something. It was because we were stolen. Amelia didn't speak, but I saw the tears well up in her eyes. And in that moment, it hit me like a freight train. The woman, the one who had followed us everywhere, the one with the decaying face and the bony hands, wasn't some random horror lurking in the woods. She was our mother, Emily Clark, the one they had killed, and she had been trying to reach us, to take us back.